but let's move on to Merav's presentation.
Okay, so now that we learned so much about spiders, let's go for a little night hike, which is something we used to do when life was, normal. And we did our things, which one of them is going on night hikes in the Santa Cruz Mountains and with some of the people that are here on this presentation. So this is kind of fun. And when you go on a night hike, then usually you start just before it gets dark and you see different things. And then we usually have dinner when it's just getting dark, and we wait till it gets really dark so we can use our flashlights and go out looking for things. And we use a red flashlight, like a regular flashlight, basically with a red tape on it, so that we won't get our eyes too, tired from the bright white light. And we also use a UV light, which we'll get to in a minute. And we never know what we'll find. So sometimes we actually don't see much, but usually we see these guys, camel crickets, and sometimes we'll see dozens of them. And if you don't look closely, they don't look like much, little hopping insect. But if you do look closely at them, they're just fascinating. They have beautiful colors. By the way, I'm not going to talk too much about each of these organisms, but if you have questions, maybe you could talk about it at the end, or if you have something that is really important, you could write it in the chat and I could try and address that. But I'm mostly going to show you lots of different things, like to show you the diversity of organisms that we might encounter on a night hike. So one group is the camel crickets. And like many of the other organisms that we'll see, during the day, they hide under logs or rocks or even in the leaf litter. And at night, they'll go out. Some of them go out to eat. So if they're predators or herbivores or whatever, they go out to eat. And some of them go out looking for a mate, trying to reproduce. Another cool organism we might see is its relative, the Jerusalem cricket. It's also called a potato bug. It's not a potato or a bug. It didn't come from Jerusalem, and it's not a cricket, but it's a really awesome insect. And you could see that they're pretty large. I mean, it's difficult to tell from the photo, obviously, but it's a pretty large insect. You usually don't see them during the day, but you might, saw them hiking somewhere. They have these long antennae, kind of small eyes, and really big mandibles, big jaws. So they could bite you if you try to handle them, but they're usually not predators. They eat all sorts of decaying material, but they would eat other insects as well. And if you go out at night, you'll probably hear some crickets. And even if you go out, like if I go out on the sidewalk in my neighborhood, I'll probably hear many different crickets, like this tropical house cricket, which is very common in my neighborhood. And we've got here both a female and a male. So the female has this long ovipositor to lay its eggs in moist soil. And the male has these short wings here. And that's how they produce sound. That's how they sing their songs. And the female are supposed to be attracted to that. Females don't produce any kind of song, which is interesting. And the other interesting thing is that they hear, so they have a special hearing organ, unlike the Jerusalem cricket, for example, which is in the foot, in their front leg, I think. Very cool. And yeah, this is one of these crickets that I found right on the sidewalk near my home. And it was sharing a meal with a big slug, a cellar slug, and some ants. And this is what they sound like at night. And I love that. If it wasn't too smoky outside, I'd open the door and you might hear them as well. But oh, I don't know if you could hear that from the presentation. I think not. Another organism that you could maybe see on a night hike in the Bay Area. It's more common in Death Valley, in the desert where I teach a class. So they are attracted to light, and sometimes if we put moth light at night, we might get adult antlions. The larva is really exciting. They look like this, nothing like the adult, because they go through a complete metamorphosis like butterflies and beetles and ants. So from an egg, they develop into a larva that feeds on insects in this case. And then after a few larval stages, they will transform into a pupa stage, which doesn't feed. And from the pupa, we'll get the adult. And you can see they have this bizarre shape. The only one that makes this funnel, so what they do is they live in kind of sandy soil, and they'll make a little funnel. I asked my daughter to make some cartoons for my presentation. So they make a little funnel of sand, and then they sit in the bottom of this pit, waiting for a little insect to fall down. And the shape is actually very sophisticated. It just looks like a little hole in the ground, but it's actually pretty sophisticated because like they sort the soil particle by size and to create the effect that they get. And then they sit down there with these huge mandibles. Look at that, waiting for an insect to fall down. And then they will catch it and pierce it and then suck everything out. So yeah, really cute little larva. I mean, just like so many of these insects and other arthropods, if you take a closer look, you kind of get a better understanding of sci-fi movies and where they get their ideas from, because they're so awesome. Okay, and then another group of insects we might see at night are beetles. Many different kind of beetles from different families. I mean, beetles is the largest group of insects or organisms in general. They're very diverse, and there are many different families. So they go out at night, again, looking for food or for a mate. Some of the carnivorous beetles, like this ground beetle, are looking for snails and slugs and other things. And then some are herbivores, like the weevils that go out at night on this coffee berry. So if you notice little feeding marks on coffee berries, I found out it's the weevils. They make that. So anyway, lots of different beetles, and some of them are specialized, and we'll get back to them. Another huge group that goes out at night is the moth. So moths belong to the same order as butterflies, but they are mostly active at night. Some of their caterpillars are active at night as well, like this tiger moth larva that you could see walking on the trails and on trees. And they could get pretty large, and they have their cute little coats, so they're very fluffy. And then the adult moth, they go out flying, looking for a mate, but many of them also feed on flowers. So specialized flowers attract moth specifically. So they'll have bright colors, or more like whitish to yellowish colors to attract moth at night. And they'll probably have a strong smell, sweet smell, to attract the moth at night. So they feed on nectar at night. And then my favorite group, ants. So I'm an entomologist and I study ants. So I'm always excited when we see ants in night hike. And one group that we often see is the Carpenter Ants. These are the largest ants you see around. This one is actually a queen. So there's the queen here and a worker Carpenter ant. And then we also see sometimes the black harvester ant, which is active during the day. So Carpenter ants are mostly active at night. The harvester ant, on the other hand, is active when it's nice. So if it's not too hot, they'll be active during the day as well. But on a hot day, they'll just go back to the nest, watch TV or whatever they do inside, and wait till the conditions outside are better. And then they might be out, like we saw them in Santa Cruz Mountains at 10:30 p.m., still out doing their things. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll see a specialized cockroach that lives, it's a Microfil cockroach, which means that it likes ants, and they live inside their nest, hiding from the ants with chemical defense. But that's a long talk. Anyway, you might see them, or other creatures that are associated with ant nests. And then another favorite group is the millipedes. So millipedes are these really awesome, kind of long arthropods. They're not insects. There are different kind of arthropods, and many of them go out at night, like this Tilobulus, which is one of our common genera in the area. Millipedes have very round body shape with many, many legs. And from each one of their body segment, they have 2 pairs of legs coming out. Unlike centipedes, which is our next slide, millipedes are herbivores, and they eat all sorts of decaying plant material mostly. And they don't bite. They don't have any venom. Instead, if you try to handle them and are not happy about it, they might secrete some chemical compounds that are kind of smelly, or they might poop on you, which is also an option. But it's kind of worth it because they're so cute. Sorry about that. Anyway, our next group is centipedes. So centipedes are closely related to millipedes, but they have much more flattened body shape. And from each one of the segments, they have 1 pair of legs coming out. Some millipedes are also kind of flat. We have the flat back millipedes, but they're different than these centipedes. Centipedes usually run very fast, and they're venomous. They have venom coming out from specialized jaws right next to their face. So you could see these are the antenna. This is the head, and it's kind of difficult to see in this photo, but these are the maxillipeds, specialized legs that they use to inject venom. If you do try to handle them, which I don't know why you would, but if you do try that, they might bite, and that should be very painful because they have venom. But they're really awesome. This is the common desert centipede, which is pretty common and comes in different colors. So they are sometimes pretty colorful and very, very beautiful creature, but they run very fast and they do bite.
Sorry, Merav, we have 2 questions.
Yes.
Okay, well, I have a question. Can you, what is the name of the specialized legs?
It's called maxillipeds.
Okay.
From maxilla, and peds is their legs.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And nice. And then can millipedes have more than 80 legs? Is there a maximum amount of legs?
Oh, I never tried to count them. There are all sorts of songs about the millipedes taking off their shoes, or putting their shoes on and stuff. They could have many legs. I'm not sure how many. I'm sure it's written somewhere. So, but otherwise we could count. I'll try and find out. So other critters that come out at night are snails and slugs. And even in San Jose, where I live, because people irrigate their gardens at night, you might see snails and slugs active on the sidewalk looking for something to eat. So most of them eat some plant material, and we already met some of their predators, and we'll meet a few more. Yeah, snails are really cool, even though this one is a non-native, the garden snail, which is super common and highly invasive. But it's not just the invertebrate that go out at night. We have some really cool vertebrates that we might find when we go for a night hike. So some of our favorites are the amphibians. And we might see a California slender salamander, which might look to you like an earthworm, because they kind of look like an earthworm. But if you look closely, you see tiny, tiny eyes and tiny, tiny, tiny legs. And these are amphibians. We also have Arboreal Salamander, and we have newts, a few different species of newts that you might see at night, especially if it's kind of wet. If it's winter and we already had some rain, then these critters might be more active. During the day, just like the invertebrates, they hide under logs and rocks and buried in the ground. And after the first rain, they'll start being more active, looking for food. And newts especially migrate to water source like creeks and ponds and to reproduce there. So we'll see them starting that activity around December till April or May. And then if we get to a nice pond in a well-protected place, we might find the California red-legged frog, which is one of our endangered species. And we might see some Sierra tree frogs calling. So frogs, especially when they try to find a mate, the male will call for a female, and we'll try and listen for that in a second. If we got to a nice pond, we might also see garter snakes, aquatic garter snakes, active during the day, but also during the night, and we might see them swimming in the pond. So I will stop sharing and then start sharing right again. Let's do that quickly. Okay.
Merav,
Yeah.
can I ask a
Sure.
quick question? Yeah,
Yes.
that's in the box, which is that are house centipedes poisonous? And I'm fairly certain they're not actually centipedes, but I'll let you take it from there.
So the problem with common names, as we probably found out in the previous presentation, is that different people might refer to different organisms using the same name. So house centipede is usually, as far as I know, is a centipede that has these really, really long legs. They might also be called daddy long legs sometimes. And they run super fast. And they're not very common around here. You might have them at home. I saw them only once in the Bay Area while camping. Like other centipedes, I guess they are venomous, but they shouldn't be highly venomous. They might be even too small to bite. So to get through the human skin, that's not that easy for little critters. So only some animals could do it. Even most spiders won't be able to bite you. Not that they would want to. Most spiders would never even try to bite you. But even if they would try, they probably won't succeed because the skin is too thick for them. Okay, hopefully that answered the question. And now let's listen to some frogs because this is really exciting. If my computer will allow us to do that. Yes, please. Okay. Are you ready for the red-legged frog? Yeah? Can you hear it? Yes.
It's been cooperative.
So they could get really loud. And I've got another one. But I might need to do it again. Sorry, I will just do this a couple of times. So yeah, this is our next one. No, we already saw you. Okay. Yes. Okay. Can you see a cute tree frog? Yes? Awesome. So this cute thing is a male Sierra tree frog calling for a female. I'll just play it one more time and then we'll get back to the presentation. I think it's awesome. I hope you enjoyed it too. Okay, now I'll share my presentation without optimizing it for video, blah, blah, blah. So let's get back here. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so male frogs call at night for a female. And by doing so, they obviously expose themselves to the predators, like snakes and other critters that might be out there. But, you know, males do weird things. This is a cool story that we noticed one time while on a night hike in Montebello in Santa Cruz Mountains. We saw this western skink. So skink, like most lizards, are actually active during the day. They are diurnal animals. But we saw this skink and we, you know, took some photos and stuff. We noticed that it was missing its tail, which was interesting. And then we noticed that there's someone else involved here. So I don't know if you could see, but there's another reptile in the photo. Right in the middle of the circle, there's a little head popping out. And this is a California king snake that was there as well. And we think maybe it got the skink tail. So skink, like some other lizards, might lose their tail in order to lose a predator. And maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. We didn't wait to find out, but it was pretty awesome to find these two guys, or ladies. And then Claire, this one is for you. This is Claire's friend from one of our trips to Death Valley. So some birds are active at night, like owls, and like this common pool wheel, which is not an owl, but it's a beautiful bird that is also active during the day and it feeds on insects and other little animals. And it's fluffy and cute, almost like Claire's knitting kit that was under her tent, and she thought it was her knitting kit, but it was a pool wheel that stayed there for a few hours, long enough for us to take some photos. Some other animals you might see at night are bats. The problem with bats, though, is that it's difficult to see them. But if you are going out camping or on a night hike, and especially if you're near a pond, you might see them flying just before it gets completely dark. We often see them, and it's just so beautiful when you notice that these are not small birds, these are bats. And the bats we have in the area are all feeding on insects, and they're pretty small. And I have to tell you a little story about bats. A few years ago, I was hiking in Coyote Valley with a friend, and we walked under one of the bridges, and she noticed that there was guano on the ground. So we looked up on the bridge, so this is the bridge, and we noticed that there's something in, bridges here have these holes underneath, and we noticed that there was something inside, but we weren't sure exactly what it was. So some Photoshop work later, we found out that there was like a whole bunch of bats sleeping inside, or I don't know, they look kind of awake to me, but they were living there under the bridge and they were just so cute. So yeah, bats are awesome. And let me try and play you something else. So, how I said it's difficult to see the bats, and we can't actually hear most species of bats, even though they are very loud to other bats, we can't actually hear them. But what we can do is we can use a bat detector to try and, see what they're up to. So let me try and play this. Come on. My computer is a bit confused about this whole thing. Yes, it's back. Okay, so this is just like a recording from my phone. You might not be able to hear it, but this is a little bat detector gadget that you could plug to your smartphone, and then you could listen to bats. So yeah, I don't know if you could hear it, but it also translates the sound to something we can hear, which sounds kind of cute. But anyway, you could listen to a bat using this thing, and it also would try and identify which bat you found, because different bats have different calls. And even though this is not perfect, like a real bat expert could look at these calls and identify them to species, which is awesome, because otherwise it's a whole diversity we can't see. And I think there are 27 species of bats in California, which is amazing. And most of them you could see in the Bay Area, or you can't see, but they live here. The next thing I'd like to talk about is ultraviolet fluorescence, which is very exciting. So when we go out using our red light, it would be very difficult to find something that looks like that, right? A scorpion, because it kind of blends in very well with its environment. But if we use a UV light, then it just pops out so beautifully, because they fluoresce in kind of greenish light. And this is actually how it looks like with these specific colors. So the background usually looks dark, and then the scorpion will kind of pop out. And sometimes when we go on a night hike in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we might see one, when we enter the forest habitat, we might see a scorpion or two, and sometimes we'd see dozens of them in one night hike. And it's just so interesting, so cool when you could see them. And often they'll be hiding in little burrows in the ground, or they'll just be out there looking for food. Another arachnid, so scorpions are arachnids, just like spiders. They belong to a different order of arachnids, and we have a few other orders that sometimes would fluoresce, not as nicely as scorpions do, but this harvestman, is kind of nice. In the tropics, like everything else, they look much nicer. But even in the Bay Area, that's pretty cool. Another cool arachnid that Shelley only mentioned, but we didn't see it earlier. This is the sun spider or wind scorpion, or I don't know. They have a whole bunch of weird common names. And we sometimes see them in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and they fluoresce pretty nicely. Some of them don't really. And then I think in Death Valley, we see slightly larger ones. And then the other group that fluoresce beautifully is the Millipedes. So we have these flatback Millipedes in the Bay Area that are mostly, we mostly see them in redwood forests on kind of wet, damp night. And then you might see dozens of them. And it's just amazing when you turn off your regular light and you turn on the UV light, you might find that there's just so many of them all around, and it's beautiful to see them. This is how they look like in regular light. So again, without the UV light, it would be very difficult to find something like that. And that's another species of millipede that also fluoresce very nicely. This is the same one. And I think it's actually a pair mating. And then sometimes centipedes fluoresce a bit, but usually they don't stay long enough for you to find out. They'll, take off quickly. And even a Jerusalem cricket might look interesting under UV light. But again, nothing like the scorpions and the flatback millipedes. And then one year we had this awesome surprise in Death Valley. So while looking for scorpions right next to our campsite, I saw this gecko. So this is the desert-banded gecko, which is, I don't know if common, but sometimes we see it in Death Valley. And apparently they fluoresce as well. And they just look like a special Halloween creature, it's just amazing. Let me play you a short video here. Yes, please. Okay. So yeah, look at that. So yeah, this is the gecko from Death Valley, and I think they're just beautiful. And then if you like tide pooling, you might want to try tide pooling at night, because some of the critters you see during the day, they actually fluoresce in UV, like sea anemones and some of the shells and hermit crabs, they fluoresce beautifully as well. And then even some plants fluoresce in UV light. We were surprised in some of these night hikes to find that some plants fluoresce. And we were always, thinking we should one day do nighttime weeding, because if you look in the middle photo, this is the notorious Italian thistle. And I think pulling the little baby Italian thistles at night might be much more pleasant than pulling their, grandparents in the middle of a hot summer night. So, just something to keep in mind. But anyway, even the plants look awesome. But it's not just things that fluoresce in UV light. Some insects actually produce light. So they glow in the dark without any interference. And unfortunately, in California, we don't have very exciting, fireflies like in the East Coast and in other places. But we do have some glowworms. And I don't know if you could see it in the photo. I had to add this circle so I won't forget to show you that this is a California, this is a glowworm right here, okay? So this is one of our exciting species. No, I mean, they are exciting. They are very cool. This is what it looks like. So this is a little beetle. This is either the female or the larva. Their biology is pretty bizarre. So the larva and the female look the same. The female is just larger. I guess an expert could tell if this is a female or a larva. I'm not sure. I think it's a female. The adult male looks completely different. And then the larva and the female, they produce some light. And and the male sometimes, depending on the species, might produce light. These are predatory beetles. Okay, so this little thing is a beetle, and they like eating millipedes. And when they catch a millipede and bite it in the neck or something, they will make a hole and crawl into the millipede and eat it from the inside, emptying it, which sounds kind of cool and another great Halloween story. And then this is the adult of a different species of a glowworm that we have here in the Bay Area. It has amazing antenna, and this is the male. Okay, the female looks like that little worm that we saw in the previous slide. There are a few different species, so the larva form might look a bit different, but the biology is similar. Yeah, I think these are really bizarre beetles. And the other group that can glow and produce light is the fireflies, which unfortunately most of our fireflies are actually the diurnal fireflies. They're active during the day, so there's no need to produce any light. Like this one in the middle here, California glowworm, which is actually not a glowworm, it's a firefly. I wonder why it's so confusing, you know, common names are interesting. But anyway, we have a few different species in the area and about 20 species in California in general. And yeah, and the adults look like that. I think both the male and the female. And in some species, they produce a bit of light, but not that much. So I guess you'll have to travel somewhere else if you want to see very exciting fireflies. But on the right season, which I think is in the middle of the summer, our friends Debbie Brusco and Gecko Wiki usually organize this awesome night hike in Montebello, looking for glowworms and fireflies and other things. And if we're lucky, we will see these little guys there. So, you know, maybe next summer, everything will be back to normal and we'll be able to go out together again. So what could you do if you want to see all these cool, amazing critters? You could go and explore your campsite at night. If you're already out there, just take a flashlight with red tape, without a red tape, just go out, get your kids. Kids find it amazing to be out at night. It's just so exciting and there's so much you could see. And then you could turn your flashlight off and just look at the stars and listen to all the animals. It's just beautiful. And then you could explore your yard. So these are things I found in my backyard a couple of weeks ago. If you go for a little walk at night, you might see all sorts of exciting things happening on the sidewalk, like, you know, slugs and snails and ants and beetles and crickets. And then one day when back to normal, so Grassroots Ecology has some awesome night hikes, as well as Mid-Peninsula Open Space District. And you could also participate in Moth Week events, which happen, I think, in July, like the end of July every year, I think. So you could put moth light on, which is basically hanging a white sheet and bringing either black light, UV light, or regular light to attract moth, but lots of other insects as well. And that's a great way to learn about them. And that's it. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Awesome.
And now I'll stop sharing so we could chat. Whoops.
Yeah.
This one.
Okay. Let's give a round of applause for Merav and Shelley for taking us on that adventure. Great. I know we have some more questions in the chat. Kathleen, do you mind sharing those?
Yep. So I'm going to go back to, I think like the beginning of the queue was from Lewis with the question, do centipedes use the legs on the end of their body to attack prey?
That's a great question. So I think those legs or tails or whatever you want to call them, I think they mostly use them to actually confuse their predators. Because if you notice, their head and their tail look very similar. So a predator might try to get them like attack them on their tail instead of their head, and they could survive that, other than if they were attacked in their head. They can't actually use that to attack their prey because their maxillipads, those specialized jaws, are in the front, right next to their mouth.
Okay, we had one about the frogs. We had a question from John. Are there other frogs that sound like the red-legged frog? Or if you hear that sound, I guess, do you know if you have them locally?
So the frog that I played was, I think, mostly the Sierra tree frog. It wasn't the red-legged frog. It might have been there together. I think I mostly heard one type of call, but I'm definitely not an expert. So I think I have a few different recordings, and I think in some of them you could hear different kind of calls. But most of what we heard there was probably the tree frog, which was the little one with a big sack. And there were red-legged frogs in that area, so they might have been calling at the same time. So different species, well, maybe to answer that question, different species will have different kind of call. And in different books, they would, describe what it sounds like, but I think it's very difficult to understand something from that. So I would look for like recordings online.
Yeah. Online, they do have recordings of the frogs. You can go in and listen to them. So just put in red-legged frog, go listen. It's
I think this is John. I when I heard your pic, I saw your picture of the red-legged frog, and I heard it, and it sounded like all the ones I have nearby my house. So they were tree frogs. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
They were tree frogs.
Okay, here's a big one. And it's a question that is probably on a lot of people's minds. What about these organisms fluorescing? This is from Rona. What are some hypotheses about why these animals spend that energy on fluorescing?
Okay, so yeah, that is a really good question. One that I think we don't really have an answer for. So people discovered that scorpions fluoresce in UV, I think like 70 years ago, something like that, some decades ago. But although there have been different studies, we don't really know why they do it. So almost all scorpions do that, other than one family probably that doesn't. Most of them do fluoresce. One study that I saw said that they can detect UV light, so that, or at least the scorpions that they studied can detect UV light, which means that they thought maybe it's good for them to avoid being eaten by other scorpions. So they want to keep their distance, because most of these predatory animals, they don't want to be near another one of their kind unless they need to mate. So they want to keep their distance, and that would be a good way to, see if there's another scorpion nearby. And another thing is when they're looking for a mate, it would be easier to find one. I don't know if that's correct. It was a little study that was published some years ago. I'm not sure.
Let's see, we have a comment from Vivian that some crab spiders fluoresce, and you can find them on garden flowers at night. That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Shelly or Merav, are there any other spiders that we should be looking at for fluorescing?
I don't remember seeing any spiders fluorescing, I think. As far as I can remember, I haven't seen any. But it doesn't mean that they don't exist. I mean, the thing with the scorpions is that almost all of them do it. But with other groups, you might find one that does. Like I saw some caterpillars, like moth caterpillars, that fluoresce pretty nicely. And, some random organisms. But it's not like the whole group fluoresce, and it's not that bright and that strong.